Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Lucas Perry. I'm 37, originally from Bloomington, Indiana, and I work as a broadcast tower technician. Basically the guy who climbs those impossibly tall red and white skeletal spires that dot the landscape and keeps your favorite FM stations humming. On the morning of the outbreak, I was 300 feet above the quiet hills outside Pine Ridge, Kentucky, strapped into a safety harness and bolted to the vertical ladder of a 1,000-foot FM tower. The tower belonged to WTLF 92.3, a regional classic rock station that transmitted to most of eastern Kentucky. My job was to replace two UHF link dishes, run diagnostics on the transmitter feed line, and install a new aviation light at the top. Routine stuff. Dangerous, yes, but familiar. The tower stood on Black Rock Ridge about 30 minutes southeast of Hazard, near the Daniel Boone National Forest. The forest spread in all directions, a vast canvas of green rolling hills, shale cliffs, and narrow dirt roads. From up high, it looked like Eden. No cell towers, no buildings, no people. Just the occasional hawk riding a thermal and the distant glint of sunlight on old coal trucks crawling down Route 15. That morning, I had left my rented cabin around 6 a.m. with a thermos of black coffee and my standard climb kit, fall arrest harness, RF suit, hard hat, tool lanyards, signal meter, and about 40 pounds of spare parts. By 9 a.m., I was already halfway up, tightening bolts on a corroded mount plate just beneath the second platform when I first noticed something was off. It wasn't the tower. The equipment was fine. No arcing, no signal anomalies. What caught my attention was the silence on the radio. I keep an old Baofeng UV5R radio clipped to my vest, mostly for weather alerts and emergency communication when I'm outside cell coverage. I had it tuned to a local NOAA frequency and hadn't heard anything in over an hour, not even the automated station ID. Curious, I switched over to the local ham repeater on 147.210 megahertz. Silence. Not even static. That was weird. Then I tried scanning. Nothing. No chatter, no truckers, no preppers. Not even the old guy in Whitesburg who always read the Bible aloud into the ether like the mountains themselves needed saving. That's when I saw the smoke. It was a thin gray column rising from somewhere west of Hazard. Not a wildfire, wrong color, too dark, too oily, probably a structure fire. Maybe a car accident. But I noticed 3 more columns rising in the distance, one over Jackson, another near Hyden, and a smaller one closer to the ridge, maybe a few miles out. I radioed ground. "Paul, you copy? I got visual on some kind of fire west of us. You see anything?" Static, then a click. Paul was my ground tech. He was 62, overweight, and usually parked under the tower reading fishing magazines and sipping sweet tea from a gallon jug. A Vietnam vet turned radio head, he had a wealth of knowledge about everything from RF interference to home-distilled bourbon. "Lucas, that you? Signal's garbage," came his voice, crackling through. "I'm getting multiple smoke plumes, something's going on." "Yeah, I see. Got my phone out. Can't load a thing. 0 bars, even on the booster. Feels like 2002 down here." I muttered a curse under my breath. "Tower's fine," I told him. "No interference up here. Dish is working, links are hot." "Then maybe it ain't us," he said. "Hold off climbing to the top just yet, something's not right." Around 10:15 a.m., I reached the third platform, which gave me nearly 270-degree visibility. From that vantage, I saw the first people, or what was left of them. They were running, if you could call it that, down an old service road that wound along the western slope. 2 men, 1 woman, and a teenage girl, all of them limping, flailing, covered in something dark. Blood, I thought. But it wasn't just that. One of them, an older man in what looked like a Walmart vest, sprinted after a woman in torn scrubs. He moved too fast, erratic, like his bones were wrong. Then he tackled her, hard. I heard her scream. Then the others pounced. They didn't run away. They ran toward the chaos. I watched in paralyzed disbelief as they, no, I won't say attacked. That implies some kind of intent. This wasn't intent. This was pure instinct. They bit. They clawed. They tore at her arms, her neck, her legs. It wasn't rage. It wasn't hatred. It was hunger. And when she stopped moving, one of them stood up, smeared in blood, and turned toward the ridge like he could sense more prey waiting. My stomach flipped. I radioed again. "Paul, you need to get in the truck, right now." Already packed up, I saw them too. What the hell's going on, man? No clue. But they're not normal. They're hurting people, ripping into them, like wild animals. Silence. Then a low whisper. "Lucas, I think they're sick, real sick, like rabies, but worse." Another plume of smoke rose just past the tree line, closer now, maybe half a mile off. I scanned with binoculars and saw a farmhouse in flames. Figures moved around the wreckage, not running for help, just staggering in circles. I didn't climb higher. Instead, I clipped into the platform rail, knelt, and tried to call emergency services on my satellite phone. No signal. That was impossible. The Global Star unit was tested last week and it worked flawlessly even in the Rockies. Something was jamming or interfering. Maybe high atmosphere activity, a solar event? I switched to backup channels. Nothing. "Paul, do not try the forest road," I warned. "Too risky. Head east, try Route 80, keep the truck locked, and if you see anything like what we just saw, drive the other way. Copy. Be safe, man. Hey, if I don't hear from you in a few hours." "No goodbyes, son," he said. "You're smarter than most. Get off that tower when it's safe. Don't play hero." Then silence. For the next hour, I watched the world unravel from a perch where no one could touch me. I saw houses burn, cars crash. People run out into the woods only to disappear into the brush. I saw dogs barking themselves hoarse, livestock trampling fences, helicopters circling low before disappearing to the east. And then came the sounds. Not human screams. Those faded after the first few hours. No, these were low, guttural noises. Moans, growls, chuffing breath like animals that never learned to sleep, and they didn't stop. Even after sunset, the forest kept muttering to itself. By 7:30 p.m., the entire valley to the west was on fire. Not just houses now, full ridgelines aflame. A gas station exploded somewhere near Chavy's. The shockwave rattled the tower. I clung to the steel bars like a beetle in a windstorm. I tried to ration water. I had 2 liters, enough for a day and a half if I sipped. Food was limited, just a protein bar and a tin of peanuts. I hadn't planned for more. I was supposed to climb, fix, descend, and be at a motel by dinner. The first night was the longest of my life. I barely moved, strapped into my harness, arms crossed to keep warm. The tower creaked, owls screeched, coyotes howled, and somewhere below, in the black trees, they prowled, whatever they were, the infected, the changed. Zombies, if you believe that word. I didn't, not really. I believed in pathogens. I believed in encephalitis. I believed in prions and parasites. But these things didn't fit any known disease model. They were fast. They coordinated. They didn't seem to sleep. And worst of all, they didn't die easily. I saw one take a deer rifle shot through the chest the next morning. It stood back up. It was Paul. He had made it as far as the old ranger outpost 5 miles out. I spotted his truck pulled halfway into a concrete culvert. The windows were busted. Blood painted the sides like a red mist. I scanned with binoculars and found him limping across the outpost lawn, his right arm dangling loose. He looked up, almost directly at me, even though I was half a mile away and camouflaged against steel and sky. It didn't make sense. From that distance, I should have been invisible. The human eye can't track detail at that range, not with backlight and elevation like I had. But there he was, Paul Carter, staring straight at the apex of WTLF's FM tower like he could feel me watching. The face I remembered, weathered, sly, and always half amused, was gone. What looked up at me now was blank, blood-matted, and barely recognizable. It wasn't just the empty expression or the slack jaw, it was the way he moved. The natural rhythms of a living man had been stripped away, replaced with sharp, awkward movements that almost looked like muscle memory fired by the wrong circuits. Then he opened his mouth. No words. Just a low, breathy howl that echoed against the treetops and sent a shiver crawling down my spine. Within seconds, others answered. Shapes emerged from the perimeter of the outpost, lurching silhouettes from the surrounding brush and the shadows of collapsed buildings. A dozen at least. Maybe more. They were drawn to Paul's call like ants to a dying moth, closing in fast, ignoring the broken terrain beneath their feet. And just like that, he turned and joined them, stumbling back into the growing swarm, absorbed and forgotten. I stayed frozen for nearly an hour after that. No movement, no radio chatter, just the still creak of the tower metal settling in the heat. The sun had risen above the haze line now, casting the forest in a sickly orange light that did little to warm the air or calm my nerves. I needed a plan, not panic. My sat phone was still useless, and the Baofeng was nothing more than a paperweight now. I couldn't get a signal lock, not even with the emergency beacon I kept clipped to my vest. GPS worked intermittently. I'd managed to confirm my elevation and general coordinates, but any attempts to send out a distress ping were met with timeouts and dead channels. I rationed my water carefully, sipping just enough to moisten my mouth without tempting thirst later. The peanuts were gone. I split the protein bar into thirds, chewing one piece slowly, trying to ignore the gnawing tension in my gut. I was going to need more than calories. I needed information, and I needed it fast. Without communications, I was blind. But there was one thing I hadn't tried: climbing higher. The tower's top section housed the primary UHF dish and the beacon strobe. From there, with my directional meter and wideband scanner, I might be able to catch residual RF traffic from nearby repeaters, or even line-of-sight bursts from mountaintop installations. It was a long shot, but it was better than sitting still. I unhooked my harness from the platform rail, secured the tool bag to my belt, and began climbing the final stretch. Every rung groaned under my weight. The steel was cold, slick with condensation, and vibrated faintly with residual energy from the active feed line. But I was careful. 3 points of contact, always clipped in, always moving with purpose. It took me 28 minutes to reach the summit mast. From 300 feet up, the view was biblical. To the north, the rolling curves of Route 15 lay empty. No headlights, no motion. The town of Hazard was a smoldering ruin, indistinct through the haze but punctuated by flickers of firelight and the occasional reflection of broken glass. The radio tower's aviation beacon blinked steadily beside me, its automated strobe pulsing every 4 seconds. A rhythm in the void. To the south, the Daniel Boone National Forest stretched in an unbroken sea of green, its serenity masking the chaos hidden beneath the canopy. I mounted the scanner dish on its bracket, aligned it with a southern ridge, and began a slow sweep across the VHF-UHF spectrum. At first, it was the usual digital noise, signal bursts, packet fragments, distorted audio. But then I caught a lock, narrowband FM, frequency 155.280 MHz, law enforcement channel. Rogersville unit is down. Repeat, down. We are requesting evac at South Gate near mile marker. Copy, over. The transmission was faint, barely audible, but it was live. That alone felt like a miracle. I tuned the dish, held my breath, and listened. Last visual placed the hostiles inside the tree line, moving fast. Do not engage. Evac bird ETA was 15, now unknown. Repeat, we've lost bird contact, no air support confirmed. Then a different voice, higher, nervous. Are we pulling back or holding position? They're getting closer. We just lost Bauer. He was pulled through the fence. Static again, then one final transmission. All units, if you hear this, scatter. Regroup at Site Delta 2. This location is compromised. Mayday protocol and transmission. And then silence. The signal faded quickly after that. I scanned for another hour, caught only scraps, fragments of emergency broadcasts, a pre-recorded evacuation order from Lexington, and what I think was a military burst transmission encrypted beyond recognition. That told me one thing. They knew. Whoever was still out there, military, FEMA, law enforcement, they had identified the outbreak. They weren't calling it in anymore. They were reacting. Site Delta 2, though, that stuck in my mind. It sounded like a fallback position, maybe a guard outpost or a mobile command center. I needed to get eyes on it. I spent the next hour triangulating based on RF strength and angle of signal decay. It wasn't precise, but I narrowed the origin down to a sector southeast of Buckhorn Lake State Resort Park. That placed it about 12 miles as the crow flies. With the terrain and roads likely blocked or crawling with infected, it might as well have been 1,200. I descended slowly, muscles sore and hands trembling. It was midday now, and the sun had burned away most of the fog, exposing the terrain below with brutal clarity. I saw more of them in the daylight, roaming in small packs, never straying too far from the roads. They didn't communicate, not in any conventional sense, but they did follow movement. Deer, cars, crows, anything that made noise or broke from the stillness. Their eyes weren't blind, but their hearing seemed sharper than normal. I watched one of them track a stray dog by sound alone for almost a mile before losing interest. I needed to stay quiet, and that meant staying on the tower. I took stock of everything again, 1 liter of water, 2/3 of a protein bar, a flare gun with 2 cartridges, the Bao Feng, dead, the sat phone, marginal, my headlamp, 2 spare batteries, a multi-tool, climbing gloves, a jacket, and duct tape, always duct tape. My plan was forming slowly. I had elevation. That gave me both time and visibility. If I could use the tower's lighting circuit, fed by an auxiliary solar cell, to power the signal booster, I might be able to amplify a call for help. The range wouldn't be great, but if Delta 2 was monitoring, I could get through. That meant rewiring. I got to work. It was slow going. The junction box had to be accessed from a narrow platform just beneath the strobe mount, and I had to work with gloves to avoid RF exposure. Using the knife blade from my multi-tool, I cut the feed to the beacon circuit, split it through a DC voltage regulator, and rerouted power to the booster's input rail. Then I adjusted the antenna angle by hand and reattached the housing. It worked, barely. I could hear the booster humming, pulling juice from the panel, and the signal strength indicator lit up weakly. But it was enough. I turned back to the emergency band and began broadcasting. This is Technician Lucas Perry at WTLF Tower Site Bravo 12, broadcasting on repeater channel Sierra 7, requesting any military or emergency response units within range. Confirm site Delta 2 and request coordinates. Over. I repeated it every 10 minutes. The sun began to set again, casting long shadows through the latticework of the tower and draping the hills in a copper haze. Below me, the world didn't look ruined. It looked peaceful, deceptively so. The real horror wasn't in what you saw, it was in what you knew was there. As night crept in, the infected grew more active. I could hear them below, grunting, moaning, sometimes snarling at each other like animals in dispute. I didn't dare use my light. Instead, I wrapped myself in my jacket, clipped into the safety rail, and tried to sleep sitting up. Every sound was a potential threat. Every whisper of wind against steel became footsteps in my mind. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a different kind of sound. Voices. Human ones. Not the infected. I sat up fast, blinking away sleep and focusing on the slope below. Sure enough, flashlights bobbed through the tree line. 3 of them, spaced wide. The beams were tight, low angle, sweeping the ground cautiously. These weren't the panicked arcs of civilians stumbling through the dark. These were search patterns. Deliberate, methodical, and slow. I knew that movement from my field training. Forward sweep, pause, adjust, sweep again. Whoever they were trained. Possibly military. Maybe not official units, but at the very least something. Law enforcement, contractors, survivalists with a clue. The real kind. They were coming from the southwest, likely climbing up from the base of the ridge that overlooked the eastern access road. It would have taken them at least 40 minutes to reach this elevation by foot through the brush, especially while maintaining stealth. That meant they had some destination in mind, and odds were good it was the tower. That flare I'd fired hadn't been subtle. Its red arc would have lit the clouds for miles in every direction. I couldn't afford to assume friend or foe anymore, but isolation was no longer sustainable either. I needed supplies, real intelligence, and preferably someone who could verify whether this Delta 2 even existed outside of a dead radio broadcast. I ducked behind the antenna housing and watched as they neared the clearing around the tower's perimeter. The first 2 figures were lean and built for movement, their silhouettes sharp against the terrain. Each one holding a compact weapon at low ready, M4 platform, likely civilian converted or military issue with a shortened barrel. Tactical vests, too, rigs built for quick access rather than weight distribution. The third figure was broader, slightly behind the others, carrying what looked like a suppressed bolt-action rifle slung over one shoulder. He moved slower, but with purpose. The lead man raised a fist, and all 3 lights clicked off simultaneously. Silence. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. I crouched low, pulled the flare gun again, not to fire but to show. It wasn't a weapon, not unless you were desperate. I tied my bandana around my left wrist and held it out over the platform edge, letting the red cloth flutter slightly in the breeze. I stayed half in shadow, not fully exposed but visible enough to avoid looking like a threat. A moment later, one of the men stepped forward into the open clearing, angling his head toward the tower. He didn't shout. Instead, he made a slow, deliberate gesture, left palm up, 3 fingers extended, then a wave downward. Recognition. A signal. Not military standard, but enough to say, "We see you, we're not hostile, we want contact." I climbed down 2 levels to the main platform, secured my gear, and called out in a low voice. "Technician Lucas Perry, WTLF Tower Crew. I've been up here 3 days. Who are you?" The man paused, then answered without shouting, but just loud enough to reach me. "Holden Myers, Independent extraction team. You made the flare call? I did. You armed? Not enough to matter. He nodded at that, then turned and made a hand signal to the others. The broad-shouldered one moved off to flank the perimeter, weapon still slung, watching the tree line. The second advanced toward the base of the tower, keeping to the side path and avoiding open gravel. These guys had done this before. Not just today, not just this week, they were operating like people used to moving through unstable zones. Not soldiers, but close. I met them halfway down the ladder, stopping 5 feet above the base platform. I still wanted the height advantage just in case. Holden looked up at me, late 30s, hard expression, jaw tense with exhaustion and sandpaper stubble across his cheeks. His eyes scanned every corner of the platform, my body, my gear, in one fluid sweep. You alone? He asked. Yes. You broadcasting? I tried. Limited power, shortwave boost, maybe hit 30 miles tops. You mentioned Delta 2 on the air. I picked up a signal, repeater channel, some kind of fallback location. Yeah, he said, and finally looked me in the eye. It's real, or it was. Might be compromised now. I sent a spike of cold through me. If Delta 2 had fallen, then the region had no operational strongholds left. That meant every outpost, checkpoint, or evacuation route had either failed or been swallowed up. The virus, or whatever this was, had spread faster than containment, faster than protocol. What happened? I asked him. He let out a breath and leaned against the tower's crossbeam, watching the forest beyond like it might decide to reach up and pull us both under. It started with 4 counties. Overnight spread. Fast, targeted. Initial symptoms masked as heat stroke or dehydration. By the time the CDC flagged it as neurological, local comms were already compromised. Quarantine zones went dark. Then they started showing up outside the lines, 2 towns over. We thought maybe some infected got through the fences, but that didn't make sense. Not without vehicles, not across that much ground. So, they're smart? I asked. He shook his head slowly. Not smart, just drawn, coordinated, like birds when they migrate. Some kind of shared direction. They saw me. One of them looked straight at me from 600 yards out, like he felt me. Holden didn't flinch at that. We've seen it too. The other 2 had finished their sweep and regrouped at the base. The quiet one with the rifle gave a subtle nod. No hostiles nearby, at least for now. We're heading for a relay cabin west of the lake, Holden said. It's old, pre-grid era. High walls, limited access, wood-fed generator. We've got 2 others already there. You're welcome to join us. I hesitated. There were advantages to staying up here: height, security, surveillance, but no food, no clean water, and no way to hold out for much longer. The tower had bought me time. It had given me perspective, but it couldn't protect me from what came next, not alone. I nodded. I'll pack what I can and come down. We moved fast. 10 minutes later, I'd broken down the scanner, sealed up my kit, and clipped my last emergency tag to the railing. Just in case. I made the climb down for real this time, boots crunching onto the gravel with finality. The platform above felt like a closing chapter behind me, the steel frame silhouetted in the faint haze of morning light. I didn't say goodbye to it, but a part of me wanted to. It had kept me alive, kept me informed, alone, but alive. I'd watched the end of the world begin from up there. Now it was time to step into it. Holden took point, eyes sweeping every shadowed patch of underbrush ahead. Behind him was Kira, the quiet, sharp-eyed woman I'd seen flanking earlier. She moved with precise confidence, her suppressed sidearm snug against her hip and a small carbine slung over her back. The third in our group, the large man with the bolt-action rifle, brought up the rear. His name was Thomas Alvarez. Older than the others, late 40s at least, with a quiet demeanor and a heavy pack that clinked faintly with every step. Likely extra ammo, tools, and rations. These weren't opportunists or looters. This was a team that had a plan. We stayed off paths, cutting through low pine and dried ferns, moving in a staggered formation. No one talked. At most, a hand signal passed down the line. Slow, halt, spread. I stayed near the center, watching our flanks, ears tuned to every bird call and snap of twigs. The infected weren't subtle, but they didn't always travel alone. Dogs had gone feral. Coyotes were braver than they used to be. We couldn't rule out other survivors either, ones not as well-intentioned. About an hour in, we came across an overturned UTV just south of an old game trail. The Kawasaki side by side was half buried in leaves, its windshield cracked but intact, one of the rear tires shredded like something had taken a bite out of it. A small scatter of dried blood flaked across the roll bar. No body, no shell casings. Whatever happened here had been fast. Holden gave a soft whistle and pointed to the ground. "See that?" he whispered. There were drag marks in the soil, uneven and curving back into the woods. They didn't belong to something dead being pulled. They looked more like someone crawling, then stumbling, then crawling again. The spacing between the scuffs tightened near a fallen log where the trail ended abruptly. Kira crouched low and touched the bark. It came away sticky with dried blackish red. Blood, hours old, maybe more. "Keep moving," Holden muttered. "They're not here now, but I don't like how fresh that looks." We pressed on, skirting the shallow basin of a creek bed. The water was murky and low, but not dry. We used a pair of smooth, flat rocks as stepping points and kept boots from splashing as best we could. Somewhere upstream, a frog chirped, then suddenly went quiet. I glanced back, expecting Thomas, but he was already halfway across, expression unchanged. It wasn't until we reached the old service road that things began to feel wrong. The relay cabin we were heading toward wasn't on any public maps. It had once served as a mountaintop microwave link before cellular infrastructure replaced it in the mid-2000s. Left dormant, the place had no grid connection but was built sturdy and isolated, about the size of a shipping container with reinforced doors and its own security fencing. According to Holden, they'd taken it over 3 days prior and fortified the interior with layered barriers, a simple ham radio rig, and thermal blankets for insulation. They had fuel drums, food scavenged from ranger stations, and a small water purifier running off solar. The perfect fallback point. But as we approached the final rise before the access trail, I saw the smoke. It was thin, light gray, not billowing, but visible, rising from just behind the tree line like a narrow signal, not accidental, not uncontrolled. Someone was cooking. Holden raised a fist and we dropped. He scouted ahead to a low ridge and crawled to a vantage point above the cabin. Kira followed him silently. I waited with Thomas behind a dense curtain of cedar, peering through the foliage. My nerves tightened the closer we got. The smoke meant people. People meant unpredictability. 2 minutes later, Kira returned alone. "We've got 2 inside the fence," she said. "One patrolling, one seated near the barrel fire." "Recognition?" Thomas asked quietly. "Negative, not our people. I didn't see Craig or Mika. These 2 are in mismatched gear. One's wearing a state corrections jacket." That sent a ripple of unease through me. Escaped inmates? Scavengers? Or worse, survivors who had found the cabin after something went wrong. Holden joined us again and looked grim. "We flank. Quiet, Lucas. Stay back. If it goes loud, we pull you in after." I didn't argue. I wasn't built for assault or clearing. I knew my role: observe, document, and avoid getting killed. I moved to the right flank behind a cluster of boulders and kept my eyes on the fence. It was chain link topped with rusted barbed wire, barely 6 feet high. Not military grade, but it would slow down infected. The gate hung slightly ajar. The man near the fire looked relaxed, too relaxed for someone in a world like this. His sleeves were rolled up, showing faded tattoos on his forearms. Gang ink, prison lines, and something new that looked like a hand-drawn symbol burned into the skin. A spiral, thick and uneven. He laughed softly to himself, stirring a tin pot over the fire. Then I saw the second figure, and immediately knew something was wrong. She was standing too still, not patrolling, just staring. Her arms hung loose, jaw slack, eyes glassy, but her skin wasn't pale or gray like the infected I'd seen. She looked alive, but disconnected, like someone whose mind had gone somewhere else. And then she turned, tilted her head back and howled. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a cry for help. It was an invitation. Holden moved instantly. I heard the pop of a suppressed shot. The firesitter dropped like a rag doll, his pot clattering. Kira moved next, closing the distance to the gate in 5 strides and slamming it shut. Thomas advanced through the side entrance, rifle raised. But the woman didn't react to the gunshot. She didn't flinch. She just kept howling, the sound raw and sharp and unnatural. I watched in horror as blood started trickling from her ears, and then her nose. She collapsed without warning, like her own voice had ruptured something inside. We breached the cabin seconds later. I followed only after Holden waved me in. Inside, the scene was worse. There were 2 bodies. Greg and Mika, Holden's original team. Greg had been shot, execution style, near the wall. Mika was slumped near the generator console, her arm still extended toward the breaker switch. The wiring had been ripped out, violently. The radio rig was destroyed, shattered glass across the floor. The fuel drums were intact but ransacked. And on the wall, scrawled in crude black marker, were the same spiral symbols I'd seen on the man's forearm. "What is this?" I muttered. Holden stared at the symbols for a long time. "We've seen these. Every town where it started bad. Churches, highway overpasses, school walls." "Some kind of cult?" I asked. "Or something worse? We thought it was just panic. Fear driving people into group delusions. But now," he trailed off. Kira spoke quietly from the corner. She wasn't infected, not fully. Her vitals were normal. But that sound, I've heard recordings like it. The CDC called it a resonance syndrome in early cases, said it was a brainstem effect triggered by certain frequencies. I thought about the radio tower, the broadcasts I'd picked up. The frequency spike just before the station in Reading went silent. "What if it's not a virus?" I said, more to myself than anyone. "What if it's a signal?" Holden didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss it. He just looked at the ruined radio rig, then at the dead woman outside. "If it is," he said grimly, "it's still broadcasting." And I realized something terrifying in that moment. Something I hadn't dared to think before. We weren't just watching a collapse. We were inside an experiment, and someone, or something, was still tuning the dials. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.